I never thought a birthday party could feel like a funeral for the living. It was my grandson's 7th birthday. Balloons strung along the fence, cake on the table, children laughing. But in the middle of that joy, I heard words that cut deeper than anything I've faced in 70 years of living. My daughter, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders, leaned down and whispered to her son, "Make a wish that Grandpa disappears." I froze. My heart didn't just break, it folded in on itself, quietly, as if the world had confirmed what I'd been suspecting for years. That maybe I was no longer wanted. That maybe, in their lives, I had already been erased. And yet, I smiled, pretending nothing happened, but inside I knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. I never thought a birthday party could feel like a funeral for the living. Yet there I was, standing in the corner of my daughter's backyard, clapping along with everyone else, while something inside me quietly folded shut. The balloons swayed in the late afternoon breeze. Children's laughter carried over the grass, and the smell of grilled hot dogs lingered in the air. It should have been a simple, happy day. My grandson was turning 7. He had on a paper crown, the kind you buy in a pack of 10 from the dollar store, and his face glowed with the kind of excitement only a child can hold. Everyone was smiling, cameras flashing, cake waiting to be cut. Everyone except me, because in the middle of that joy, my daughter leaned down to her boy, my grandson, my blood, and whispered words I will never forget. "Make a wish that Grandpa disappears." At first, I thought I had misheard. Maybe she said something else, something playful, but her voice was clear, her tone too sharp, too deliberate. I saw his small head nod, as if what she had asked was as normal as wishing for toys or candy. And in that instant, I wasn't a fat her anymore. I wasn't a grandfather. I wasn't even a man standing at his family's table. I was something to erase, something to wish away. Tell me, what does a man do when the daughter he once carried on his shoulders teaches her own son to imagine a world without him? Would you have spoken up right then, in front of everyone, or would you have swallowed it, like I did? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments, because I still don't know if I made the right choice. I stood frozen, hands at my side, as the boy blew out his candles. Everyone cheered, the sound swelling like a wave, but all I could hear were her words repeating inside me. Make a wish that Grandpa disappears. I had brought a gift for him, a baseball glove, the same kind I used to buy for my daughter when she was his age. I remember wrapping it carefully the night before, folding the paper just right, choosing ribbon even though I knew kids tear through things without looking. I imagined showing him how to break in the leather, the same way I once showed his mother. That box sat unopened, shoved to the bottom of a pile of brighter, shinier gifts. Plastic toys, noisy gadgets, things that made the other kids squeal. My gift was quiet, waiting, ignored. The cake was cut. I was given a slice, though no one asked if I wanted it. I sat in a lawn chair that seemed smaller than the rest, my knees pressed up against the folding table. I tasted the frosting, but it was like chewing chalk. I looked around at faces that used to light up when I walked into a room. Now, most of them avoided my eyes. My son-in-law chatted loudly with his brother. My daughter moved like a hostess in her own home, efficient, practiced, smiling for her guests. But she never once looked at me. Not once. And so I clapped when the candles went out. I smiled when the boy tore through his gifts. I even laughed when someone made a joke I boss. Rely heard. All the while, I felt something dark curling at the edges of my chest, something that told me the role I thought I still had, father, grandfather, was already gone. Have you ever been in a room full of people, yet felt completely invisible? If you have, you'll understand what I mean when I say it's lonelier than any empty house. If you've ever lived that silence, I'd like to know. Leave me a comment. Sometimes it helps to know I'm not the only one who's felt this way. At one point, I caught my grandson's eyes across the yard. He was opening a box with bright wrapping paper, pulling out a toy car that made siren noises. He grinned wide, then turned back to his friends. For a moment, he looked like his mother did when she was young. Cheeks flushed, laughter too loud for the space around her. That memory stung. Because I had loved her more fiercely than anyone. She was my little girl. I used to tell her bedtime stories, chase away her nightmares, fix her broken toys with tape and patience. I thought I was building something permanent between us. And yet, here we were. She standing at the center of her family, me pushed quietly to the margins. Later, when the cake was nearly gone and the sun had started to dip, my daughter finally walked past me. I thought, just for a second, that she would sit down, maybe even say thank you for coming. Instead, she looked at me the way you look at an old photograph you don't know where to put. She said only, "You've had some cake, right?" I nodded. "Yes." That was it. She turned and moved on, gathering plates, laughing with someone else. And I sat there, holding an empty paper plate, my heart heavier than it had been in years. I left before the party ended. I told my son-in-law I wasn't feeling well, and he gave me a polite nod, barely pausing his conversation. I walked out the gate, the sound of children playing fading behind me, the balloons bobbing in my peripheral vision. When I got into my car, I didn't start it right away. I just sat there, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. They looked, older than I remembered. Veins standing out, skin-lined, fingers trembling slightly. I wondered if that was how my daughter saw me. A man past his usefulness, a shadow to be tolerated at family events, until even that became too much. I thought of her words again, whispered into my grandson's ear, "Make a wish that Grandpa disappears." That was when the first crack formed inside me, not anger, not even sadness, just a hollow silence that told me something had shifted forever. Would you have stayed? Would you have finished the party, eaten the cake, forced the smile? Or would you have walked away sooner? I ask because I can't stop wondering if my silence made me weak, or if it was the only dignity I had left. When I finally drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house was still full of people, full of life. No one noticed me leaving. No one waved. I could have been anyone, a guest from down the street, a passerby who had wandered in. But I wasn't just anyone. I was the man who had raised the woman hosting that party. The man who had once been her hero. The man who used to be called Dad with love, not obligation. I told myself I'd forget it, that I'd go home, eat dinner, watch television, and by tomorrow, the sting would fade. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't, because some words don't just cut once. They echo. They replay in the quiet hours of the night when there's no one else around to tell you it wasn't real. And so I drove home, the unopened glove still sitting under the pile of gifts, left behind like me. I pulled into my driveway, shut off the engine, and sat in the dark for a long while. I didn't know then that the party was just the beginning, that the real betrayal, the kind that seeps into your bones, was still waiting for me. Driving home that night, I felt as though I had two lives inside me, one that had already ended, and another that I didn't quite know how to live anymore. My daughter's words from the party repeated in my head like an old song on a broken record. "Make a wish that Grandpa disappears." The engine hummed beneath me, headlights cutting across the road, but I wasn't really driving. I was drifting through memories I hadn't touched in years. I saw her first birthday, clear as daylight. She had a tiny pink dress on. Her mother had baked a cake that leaned to one side, and when we put it down in front of her, she smashed her fists into it with pure delight. Frosting on her cheeks, crumbs in her hair, laughter filling the kitchen. That was my girl, my little girl. And now she was the woman who wanted me erased. It felt like betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It accumulates. Every forgotten call, every cold glance, every half-hearted word. And then one day, it finally shows its face. If you've ever had a memory you once cherished turn into a wound you can't close, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. Sometimes telling it is the only way to make it bearable. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as another memory surfaced. The swing. I had built it with my own hands, spent hours in the backyard, sawing and hammering, sweating through a summer afternoon just to hear her laugh when she first swung high into the air. I tied the knot so carefully, double-checking because I didn't want her to fall. I remember her calling out, "Higher, Daddy, higher," and me pretending I could push her to the clouds. That swing stayed in the yard for years, long after she outgrew it. Even when she was in high school, I'd catch her sitting on it sometimes. Not swinging, just lost in thought. Maybe I should have asked what was on her mind back then. Maybe I should have listened harder. Did I miss the moment she stopped needing me? Did I let her slip away without realizing it? When I think of that swing now, it doesn't feel like love. It feels like evidence in a case I can't win. Proof that I gave everything and it wasn't enough. At a red light, I closed my eyes. Another pictus. Ree came back, sharper than the rest. She was 7, the same age as my grandson now. She'd woken from a nightmare, crying that there was a monster under her bed. I sat on the floor, lifted the blanket, checked every corner of that room, and then promised her I'd keep her safe. "Nothing bad will happen while Daddy's here," I said. And she believed me. She curled into me, small arms around my neck, and finally fell back asleep. Now I wonder, did she forget those nights, or did they stop mattering the moment she grew older and learned that fathers aren't invincible? Maybe she rewrote me in her head, turned me into someone I never was. Maybe that's why she could lean down to her son and ask him to imagine a world without me. I can't help but ask you, do children remember the promises we make in the dark, or do they forget the moment they outgrow their need for us? Tell me what you think, because I truly don't know anymore. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked colder than usual. My porch light flickered, the paint on the door peeling at the edges. I stepped inside and was met with silence, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, but presses down until you can barely breathe. I sat at the kitchen table, the one where we used to eat as a family, and looked at the empty chair across from me. For a moment, I saw her sitting there again, a teenager doing homework while I tried to sneak her extra snacks when her mother wasn't looking. I remembered the nights we stayed up late, watching old movies, her leaning against me when she got tired. That same chair was empty now, and it struck me that maybe it always would be. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the receipt from the gift shop, the one where I'd bought the baseball glove for my grandson. I unfolded it and stared at the numbers. $39.95. I could almost laugh at how little it took to hold so much meaning. $39 for a chance to pass down a piece of myself. $39 to be left unopened at the bottom of the pile. I placed the receipt on the table and sat there, staring at it like it could answer me. Why did she say it? Why those words? Was it just a cruel joke, or was it the truth spilling out in a moment she thought no one else could hear? I wanted to believe it was a mistake. I wanted to believe my daughter didn't mean it, that she was tired or distracted or careless. But the way she avoided my eyes, the way she brushed past me like I wasn't even there, that wasn't a mistake. That was something deeper. Later that night, I walked into the living room and turned on the television just to fill the silence. Some sitcom played, the canned laughter echoing through the room, but I couldn't follow the story. I muted it after a few minutes and just sat in the glow of the screen. I thought about denial, how it creeps in when you don't want to face the truth. I told myself she couldn't have meant it, that maybe she didn't even realize what she said. But then I heard it again in my head, her tone, the sharpness in her voice. It wasn't careless, it was pointed. And that's what hurt the most. Because denial can only hold you for so long before the cracks begin to show. I went to bed late, but I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words repeating themselves until they felt burned into me. Make a wish that Grandpa disappears. If you've ever heard words you couldn't unhear, you'll understand what I mean when I say they don't stay outside of you. They move in. They make a home in your chest. They whisper to you when you're trying to rest. If this story touches something in you, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you think. At some point, I must have dozed off, but the dreams were restless. I woke before dawn, the house still dark, the ache still heavy. I stood by the window, watching the sky lighten, and I asked myself a question I never thought I'd ask. Had I become disposable? That word stuck to me like a label I couldn't peel off. Disposable. Like the wrapping paper that gets torn away and thrown in the trash. Like the cardboard boxes gifts come in, useful once, then discarded. I thought about every sacrifice I had made, working late hours, saving for her college, being there through breakups and mistakes. All of it suddenly felt like paper tossed into the wind. And yet, even in that moment, a part of me clung to hope. I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe if I called her tomorrow, things would be different. I wanted so badly to believe that. But deep down, I already knew the truth. And I didn't know then that even darker signs were waiting for me, just around the corner. I think the worst betrayals don't arrive in a single blow. They arrive in pieces, small quiet fragments that you don't even notice until they've built a wall between you and the person you love. That's how it happened with my daughter. I didn't lose her all at once. I lost her in phone calls that went unanswered, in conversations that grew shorter, in the way her laughter no longer reached me. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that she was busy, that life had swept her into its current, as it does to all young people. I reminded myself that I too, once upon a time, had been caught up in my own world, too busy to notice my father waiting by the phone. But still, the silence felt heavier with her. It wasn't just time slipping by. It was presence disappearing. And the strange thing is, I let it happen. I still dialed her number, left messages that were never returned, told stories into the void of her voicemail as if she were listening. "Just checking in, sweetheart," I'd say. "Nothing urgent. Call when you can." Sometimes days would pass before she called back, sometimes weeks. And when she finally did, her voice sounded rushed, clipped, like she was checking a task off a list rather than speaking to her father. Have you ever felt like a guest in your own child's life? Tell me in the comments if you've known that ache. I'll be reading them. It wasn't only the phone calls, it was the holidays too. Once upon a time, Christmas meant she'd help me hang lights across the porch, her laughter echoing into the night as we struggled with tangled wires. But somewhere along the way, I became the man whose chair kept shifting further from the center of the table. At Thanksgiving, I was nudged toward the corner, away from the laughter, like an afterthought. I watched as new traditions took root, games and jokes I wasn't part of, recipes I hadn't tasted before. My stories about the past, the little rituals I had carried for years, no longer seemed to belong. I kept telling myself, at least I'm still here. That should count for something, but there's a world of difference between being there and being wanted. There was one moment that still lingers, sharper than most. She had been struggling with her mortgage then, I knew, because she had mentioned it in passing, her voice quieter than usual, a kind of heaviness beneath her words. And as her father, I wanted to lift that weight. So, one evening, I offered. I told her I could help with a few payments, just until she got steady again. Her reply was quick, almost too sharp. "No, Dad, I don't need your money." I remember freezing in that silence. The way she said it carried something more than pride. At the time, I admired it. I thought, that's my girl, strong, independent, determined to make her way in the world. But now, looking back, I wonder if it was something else. Was it really independence? Or was it rejection? It's a strange kind of loneliness to realize you've been written out of the role you thought you'd always play. If this story touches you in any way, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you think. The denial carried me for a while. I convinced myself that her distance wasn't distance at all, just the natural rhythm of life. I told myself that being invited at all, still being given a seat at the table, was proof I mattered. But denial is a fragile shield. Every time I caught her glancing past me, every time her phone lit up mid-conversation and she chose to answer it instead of listening to me, I felt the cracks spreading wider. One night, at her house, I noticed something so small it almost didn't register. She was telling a story to her friends, something funny from her childhood. I listened, waiting for the part where I usually appeared. I thought she'd mention the swing I built for her, or the way I carried her on my shoulders through the fair. But she told the story as if I wasn't there at all. My role had been replaced by vague details. We used to. We always. It was so much fun. No dad anywhere in the telling. That was when I understood. My presence wasn't vanishing by accident. It was being erased, memory by memory, story by story. Still I held on. Foolishly, maybe. I told myself she loves me in her own way. She doesn't mean it like this. Maybe tomorrow will be different. But every tomorrow looked more like yesterday. Do you think I was wrong to stay quiet? Would you have spoken up? Tell me in the comments. I wonder if I should have done things differently. The hardest part wasn't the silence or even the distance. It was the pretending. Pretending that I didn't notice her eyes dim when I entered the room. Pretending I didn't hear the sigh in her voice when she answered my call. Pretending I didn't see her choose other people's advice over mine. I kept sitting at that corner chair, year after year, convincing myself that at least I was part of the picture. But deep down, I knew. My daughter had already built a new life, with new voices to fill the spaces where mine once lived. And the cruelest truth? I had ignored the signs because facing them would have broken me sooner. I didn't know then that the next sign would be impossible to ignore. There are words that wound, and then there are silences that cut even deeper. I used to think that anger, even rejection spoken out loud, would be the hardest to carry. But I was wrong. What hollowed me out wasn't her shouting or accusing or blaming. It was the way her voice no longer carried warmth when she spoke to me, the way she left gaps in conversation where love used to live. I remember calling her just a few days after Thanksgiving. I had rehearsed what to say in my head. Something simple. Ask about my grandson. Ask how she was holding up at work. Maybe even slip in a memory to remind her of us. I thought if I spoke carefully enough, if I didn't press too hard, she might soften. When she answered, her voice was polite, like a receptionist at an office, but there was nothing behind it. "Hi, Dad." 2 words, but they landed like stones. I asked about my grandson. I told her I hoped school was treating him kindly, that kids weren't giving him too much trouble. I even mentioned the baseball glove I had bought for him, how I'd pictured him practicing catches in the yard the way she once did with me. Her reply was short. "He has plenty of toys." That was all. No thank you, no smile in her tone. Just a line meant to close the subject, and in that moment I felt myself shrinking. The questions I had prepared, the words I wanted to give her, they all withered. I became a man stammering into silence, filling pauses with nervous chuckles, trying to sound like I belonged in a conversation where I was clearly an outsider. When I finally hung up, I sat in the kitchen with the phone still in my hand. The house around me seemed to grow larger in the quiet. The tick of the clock above the stove was the only sound, steady and merciless. Every second that passed felt like another reminder that her world no longer needed me. Have you ever had a moment where someone's silence said more than their words ever could? If you have, write it in the comments. I'll be reading them. The thing about silence is that it doesn't stay on the phone. It followed me into every corner of my house. I opened the refrigerator, and the hum of its motor seemed louder than usual. I poured myself a glass of water, and the clink of the glass on the counter echoed like I was living in a place built for someone else. I used to think of this house as full of her laughter bouncing off the walls, full of arguments over curfews and music turned up too loud, and the smell of popcorn on a Saturday night. Now it felt like a stage after the actors had left. Props still standing, but the story already finished. That night I tried to cook dinner. Something simple. Scrambled eggs, a couple slices of toast. But I couldn't taste anything. I just pushed food around on my plate until it went cold. I thought about calling her back, just to hear her voice again, but pride stopped me. Or maybe fear. Fear that she wouldn't pick up at all. If this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you think. I kept replaying her words in my mind. He has plenty of toys. Such an ordinary sentence, but it carried the weight of dismissal. It was as if she was telling me, we don't need you. Not your gifts, not your efforts, not even your place in his life. I tried to remember the last time she had sounded excited to hear from me. Maybe it was years ago, when she first moved into her own apartment and called me to ask how to fix a leaky faucet. Back then, she still reached for my voice in moments of uncertainty. Back then, she still believed I carried answers. But now I was nothing more than a polite obligation. I asked myself, not for the first time, when did I stop being her father? Was there a moment, a specific day, when that role was quietly set down and never picked up again? Or had I only ever been holding it temporarily, like a borrowed coat she no longer wanted, once it stopped fitting? Do you think fatherhood ever really ends, or does it just fade when our children stop looking back for us? Tell me in the comments. I wonder how others see it. The night dragged on. I sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were washed, staring at the empty chair across from me. That chair had once been hers. I could still see her swinging her legs underneath it as a little girl, telling me about her day at school. I could still hear her laughter when she spilled juice and tried to hide it with a napkin. The ghost of those memories filled the seat, but she was gone. I went to bed that night and lay awake, listening to the creaks of the house. Every sound felt like an echo of absence. I thought about driving to her house the next day, surprising her, forcing the closeness that was slipping through my hands. But I didn't. Something in her tone had told me that closeness was no longer mine to claim. I woke the next morning to sunlight pouring through the blinds, but it felt like winter had settled inside me. The silence was no longer just between us. It was inside me too. And yet, even in that emptiness, a part of me still hoped I was wrong. That maybe she was just tired. Maybe she was distracted. Maybe next time her voice would carry warmth again. But deep down, I knew better. What I didn't realize then was that silence has a way of building, and soon hers would grow into something that could no longer be ignored. There comes a point where silence feels heavier than words, and you start to think that maybe speaking, no matter how risky, is the only way forward. For weeks, I had carried her sentence around like a stone in my chest. Make a wish that Grandpa disappears. I told myself it was just thoughtless, that maybe she hadn't meant it, that maybe I was oversensitive, but the more I replayed it, the more it gnawed at me. One Sunday afternoon, without planning it, I found myself driving toward her house. I told myself I was only dropping off a book I thought my grandson might like, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. I wasn't there for the book. I was there for an answer. When she opened the door, her face froze for a moment. Not surprise, not joy, just that flicker of irritation that told me I had crossed some invisible line. I held out the book, my hand awkward, my smile even worse. "Thought he might enjoy this," I said. She took it without looking at me. "Thanks." The silence stretched between us, and I realized if I didn't speak now, I never would. So I swallowed hard and asked softly, "Why did you say that? At the party?" Her eyes shifted. They hardened, like glass catching light. "Dad," she said, "you take things too seriously. It was a joke." But there was no laughter in her voice, no softening in her face, only irritation, like my question was an inconvenience. I nodded, pretending to accept it, but inside, something broke. I had hoped for denial, for regret, maybe even an apology. What I got instead was dismissal. Have you ever confronted someone you love, only to walk away feeling smaller than before? If you have, write it in the comments. I'll be reading them. I stood there a moment longer, searching her eyes for something, anything, that might tell me she didn't mean it. That somewhere beneath her irritation, the little girl who once clung to my hand was still there. But she only shifted her weight and said, "I've got things to do, Dad." That was my cue to leave. The drive home was long, even though the distance wasn't far. The road stretched ahead of me, quiet and unforgiving. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but my mind was somewhere else. I thought about all the times I had stood up for her, even when she didn't know it. The nights I worked overtime so she could have the school trip she wanted. The weekends I sacrificed so she could play sports or go to friends' houses. The hospital visits, the broken hearts I tried to mend, the promises I whispered at her bedside when she had nightmares. And now, after everything, my question was brushed off as though it were nothing more than an annoyance. "Dad, it was a joke." Those words played in my head like a cruel refrain. A joke. Tell me in the comments, would you have let it go, or would you have pressed harder? By the time I pulled into my driveway, the book excuse seemed pitiful. I hadn't given my grandson a gift. I had given myself a wound. And worse, I had confirmed what I feared, that whatever bridge once connected us was crumbling fast. I stepped inside my house, set my keys on the counter, and sat down at the kitchen table, the same place I had sat countless times before, but that day it felt different, heavier. I rested my head in my hands, not crying, just empty. The clock ticked on the wall, the refrigerator hummed, life moved forward, indifferent to my heartache. I poured myself a cup of coffee, though I didn't really want it. I stared at the steam rising from the mug and wondered when love had turned into obligation. When had my presence become something to be endured instead of cherished? I thought about calling her again, but I knew how that would end. More politeness, more hollow replies, more silence. So I sat in my chair until the sun went down, watching the light fade through the blinds. The room grew darker, but my thoughts grew sharper. It struck me then that confrontation hadn't brought us closer. It had only shown me how far apart we truly were, and the worst part, I wasn't sure there was a way back. If this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you think. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I replayed her face in my mind, the hardness in her eyes, the way her tone carried no warmth. I used to think that even if the world turned against me, my daughter never would. That belief had kept me deterred, going through so many storms. But now, even that anchor was slipping away. What do you do when your own child shuts the door on your heart? Do you knock again, or do you learn to live outside? I didn't know the answer then, but I knew one thing: silence would no longer be enough. What came next would cut even deeper. It didn't happen with a fight. There was no slammed door, no final words shouted in anger. The silence was worse. It was quieter than any argument could ever be. Weeks passed and then months, and I realized the invitations had stopped. Birthdays came and went without my name on the list. Holidays, once filled with the noise of children and the smell of food cooking, unfolded without my presence. Even the casual dinners that used to be routine were gone. My phone sat on the counter like a stubborn reminder, its screen blank, while the world outside moved on. And then there were the photos, smiling faces on social media, my daughter and her family glowing under strings of lights or blowing out candles on a cake. My face was not there. I had been erased quietly, without anyone even saying the word goodbye. You know, emptiness doesn't come all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water through a crack. At first, I thought maybe they had been busy, maybe schedules had gotten tangled, or maybe I had missed a call, but eventually I stopped making excuses. The truth was too heavy to ignore. They had decided that life was easier without me, and what cut deepest was that they hadn't even told me so. They just stopped including me. If you've ever had the kind of silence that speaks louder than words, tell me in the comments. I'll be reading them, because sometimes the hardest part of this kind of pain is wondering if you're the only one who's felt it. Evenings became the hardest. I would sit at my kitchen table, the same wooden table that once held a family. Lafties, bar bouncing across the room, children running in and out, plates passed around with the comfort of belonging. Now it sat bare, except for me. I ran my hands across the grooves carved into the surface. One of them, I remembered, was from when my grandson had pressed too hard with a crayon while coloring. I had kept it there, not sanding it down, because it reminded me of a day when I mattered enough to be part of his world. That night, staring at those marks, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even grief, just a stillness. A stillness that told me there would be no more phone calls to ask when I should come over, no more last-minute dinners, no more grandchildren racing to hug me at the door. The house was empty, and so was I. "Dad, you take things too seriously." Those were her words the last time we had spoken honestly, and maybe she was right. Maybe I did take love too seriously. Maybe I expected too much. But I couldn't escape the thought that what I was asking for wasn't unreasonable. I wasn't asking for parades or praise, just a place at the table. Just to be remembered. I wonder, would you have fought harder? Or would you, like me, eventually realize that chasing someone who has decided to leave you behind only deepens the wound? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know how others see it, because I sit here wondering if silence is strength, or just another kind of defeat. The breaking point wasn't explosive. It was quiet, almost gentle, like a final door closing softly behind me. That evening, with the house dark except for the kitchen light, I whispered to myself, enough. I couldn't keep begging for a place in her life. I couldn't keep showing up at the door with excuses. A book for my grandson, a bag of fruit, any little reason to still be part of them. Every time I did, her eyes reminded me that I was trespassing in a world that no longer included me. So I let go. Or at least I told myself I did. I decided that night I would no longer chase after their love. That if she wanted me gone, I would give her exactly that. The silence in the house deepened, but for the first time, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check to see if maybe she had written or left a message. I simply sat in that chair, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and accepted the truth. But acceptance brought with it another wound I hadn't expected. If I wasn't a father in her eyes anymore, then who was I? Who does a man become when the one person he raised turns him into a stranger? The question circled in my head until it became heavier than the silence itself. If this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you think, because these words aren't easy to say out loud. They carry weight, and sharing them is the only way I know how to keep going. I thought of the years I had carried her, literally, in my arms when she was small, and then later, in the choices I made and the sacrifices I offered. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake when she was sick, the times I had set aside my own wants because hers seemed more important. I thought of her first apartment, the one I helped her paint before she moved in, how she had stood there with a roller in her hand and a smile on her face, thanking me. That smile felt real back then. I thought of the day she became a mother herself, how I had held her hand, steadying her nerves, telling her she would be wonderful. All of those moments lived inside me, and yet, in her eyes now, they might as well have never happened. It's a strange thing to realize you're holding on to memories that no longer exist for the other person, that what feels like love to you has become nothing but dust to them. That night, I sat in the dim light of the kitchen and asked myself the question I still can't answer. If I am no longer her father, then who am I? The clock ticked, the house breathed, and I remained still. But stillness doesn't last forever. Something always stirs beneath it. And for me, it was a thought I hadn't yet allowed myself to speak. I didn't know it then, but the silence wasn't the end. It was only the space before something far heavier would come. There comes a point when a man gets tired of staring at a silent phone. I reached that point without even realizing it. One morning, I glanced at the black screen on the counter, waiting for the name that would never light it, and I felt nothing. No expectation, no sting, just an empty acceptance. That was when I knew I couldn't keep living in the hollow space she had left for me. If she wouldn't have me in her world, then I had to build my own, however small. So, I began living differently. It wasn't dramatic. No bold statements, no angry letters, just a quiet shift. I reached out to old friends, the ones who still remembered to call, even if weeks had passed. They asked me how I was, and though I never told them the full truth, it mattered to be asked. I planted a garden in my backyard. At first just a few herbs and flowers, but soon I dug deeper, laying rows of soil for tomatoes, beans, and even roses. Every seed I pressed into the dirt carried a strange kind of defiance, a reminder that life would grow whether anyone watched or not. If you've ever poured yourself into something small just to feel whole again, tell me in the comments. I'll be reading, because sometimes the smallest acts are the ones that keep us standing. The toys and books were the hardest. I had bought them over the years for my grandson, stacking them neatly in the corner of a closet. Board games, storybooks, little puzzles, all waiting for the visits that never came. One afternoon, I opened the closet, stared at the unopened boxes, and carried them out to the car. I drove to a shelter for children, walked in, and set them down on a table. The woman at the desk smiled, asked if I wanted a receipt. I shook my head. What mattered wasn't the paperwork. What mattered was that some child would play with those toys, read those books, laugh at the pages. My grandson never would, but another child could. I suppose there was a kind of revenge in it, though I never said so. Each seed planted, each gift given, each child's life I touched without knowing. It reminded me that my worth didn't end where her acceptance did. She might erase me, but I refused to let myself disappear. Still, late at night when the house was quiet and the garden sat under the weight of the moonlight, my mind wandered. I pictured the boy blowing out his birthday candles, his face lit by the small flames, his little fist tight as he made his wish. Did he wish me gone because his mother asked him to? Or did he, in his innocence, wish for something kinder, something I might never know? That thought cut me in two. The idea that she could take my daughter from me was one thing, but to think she might shape my grandson into forgetting me altogether, that was a wound I didn't know how to name. Tell me in the comments, would you hold on to hope that a child's love could outlive a parent's bitterness, or would you let go completely to spare yourself the hurt? I ask because I still don't know which choice makes a man stronger. Over time, I stopped checking the phone, stopped hoping for the apology that would never come. I told myself it was freedom, and maybe it was, in a way. I gave my love to places where it could breathe, to the garden, to the laughter of friends, to small kindnesses no one saw. That was where dignity lived, not in begging for scraps of love, but in giving freely where I could. But dignity doesn't erase longing, it only makes it quieter. Some nights, when the air was heavy and the crickets sang, I found myself walking through the garden rows, touching the leaves, breathing in the scent of soil. I would whisper to myself, almost like a prayer, I am still here, I am still a father, even if she no longer sees me that way. If this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you think, because sharing these words makes me feel less invisible. Yet the question never stopped haunting me. Who was I becoming? Was I a man who had finally found peace, or just a man who had grown used to shadows? I didn't know the answer. What I did know was that I no longer felt the need to knock on her door. That chapter had closed. Still, one truth gnawed at me: silence has a way of breeding something heavier if you let it sit too long. And though I tried to bury myself in gardens and gifts, there were nights when I could feel the weight of something unfinished pressing against my chest. I didn't know then that silence, left unbroken, was not the end. It was the seed of something else. Something I wasn't ready for. There's a silence deeper than the absence of sound. It's the silence that comes when your child stops reaching for you, stops needing you, stops seeing you. That silence doesn't echo. It settles in your chest like a stone, and I carry it with me every day. I don't know if my daughter will ever come back to me. Maybe she won't. Maybe the door I keep imagining will never open. In her story, perhaps I am the villain, the shadow she's been trying to outrun, the mistake she refuses to forgive, the reminder of something she no longer wants in her life. I'll never truly know because she has chosen not to tell me, but in mine, I know the truth. I was there. I loved her. I stayed. I showed up when she needed rides to practice, when she needed help with homework, when she cried on the couch after her first heartbreak. I showed up when she didn't ask, when she thought she didn't need me, when she believed she could do it all alone. I stayed even when it hurt. Being erased by your own child is a death that keeps you breathing. You walk, you eat, you plant your garden, you laugh with friend. DS, but part of you is buried long before your body is done. That's the part people don't talk about, the quiet funeral you attend for yourself again and again every time you realize you're no longer wanted. And yet, this wound is also a teacher. It showed me something I would never have learned otherwise. Fatherhood doesn't end where rejection begins. It shifts. It continues in memory, in dignity, in the quiet choice not to let bitterness own you. If you've ever felt invisible to the ones you love most, write it in the comments. I'll be reading them, because no one should have to carry that weight alone. I've come to understand that my love for her doesn't need her permission to exist. It lives in me, whether she sees it or not. It lives in the photo albums, in the stories I still tell, in the moments I replay in my head when the nights are long. Love doesn't disappear just because someone looks away. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't still hope. Hope is stubborn. It lingers like the faint smell of perfume on a coat long after the person is gone. I still imagine her voice softening, her hand reaching back, her son asking about me with curiosity instead of silence. One day, if my grandson does ask about me, I hope someone will tell him the truth. Not the version where I'm erased, not the version where I disappeared, but the truth that I stayed faithful to love even when love wasn't returned. That I never stopped being his grandfather, even when I wasn't allowed to act like one. That I never stopped being her father, even when she stopped calling me that. Tell me in the comments, would you keep waiting for that day, or would you let the hope go? I ask because I don't know what's braver, holding on or finally setting it down. These days I live smaller. My garden is my companion. I walk slowly, hands in my pockets, feeling the soil shift under my shoes. I talk less, because the words don't come easily anymore. But I'm not bitter, at least not most of the time. Bitterness is heavy, and I'm too tired to carry it. Instead, I've chosen dignity, not the kind that demands recognition, but the kind that grows quietly inside when you choose to keep loving even when it's unseen. I've learned that dignity isn't about pride, it's about peace. If this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you think, because telling these truths only matters if someone out there hears them. I can't control whether my daughter forgives me or even remembers me kindly. What I can control is how I live with the silence she's left behind, and I choose to live it without hatred. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it has to be. I'll end with this. Love is not wasted just because it isn't returned. It leaves a mark, even if you never see it bloom. And if I have anything left to give, it will be that truth. Because even in the shadows, even in the silence, I am still a father, and that will never change.